So we are now in week 12 of the college football season, and things are getting a lot more interesting as we get close to the end of the season regarding the playoff race, what teams need to do to get in, what teams still have a shot. And so in this one, I'm going to be going over all of the teams that still have a chance to make the college football playoff, starting with number one, Ohio State. Their path is pretty straightforward. I wrote that they clinched, and that's essentially true because they're not losing to UCLA. They're not losing to Rutgers. If they go 13-0 and beat Indiana in the Big Ten Championship, they will be the number one seed. They could go 12. I think if they lose to Michigan and then beat Indiana, I don't even know if that's possible, but if that were to happen, they would have a shot at number one. Depends on what happens in the SEC. But regardless, they're clinched. They could go 11-1, lose to Michigan. They would still be in and likely still host a playoff game. Same deal with Indiana. I think they're going to run the table and be 12-0. They clinched the one seed with 13-0 too, because that would mean they beat Ohio State. And so Indiana fans, it's looking pretty good for them right now. Texas A&M, the front runners of the SEC, I think that they're essentially clinched too. I mean, if you look at their remaining schedule, they're not losing to South Carolina. They're not losing to Samford. They could potentially lose to Texas, but even if they lose that game, they'll be 11-1. They'll still be in the playoff. I think if they go 13-0, they would be for sure the 2 and potentially the 1, depending on what happens in the Big Ten. Might need a little bit of chaos in the Big Ten. For example, maybe you need Michigan or USC to end up winning that Big Ten title, which is a long shot but possible. And then I think they get the 1 seed. Alabama, I think they are nearly clinched. That's why I wrote that there, because there are still some opportunities for them to slip up on their schedule. Starting this weekend with Oklahoma, that's a big game for Oklahoma. And then Eastern Illinois, they'll win. At Auburn can always be tricky. I think if they go 10-2, they're in. If they go 11-2, they're in. If they go 12-1, they're in. If they go 12-1, I think they'll be at the 2 seed. Again, unlikely that they'll get the 1 seed at 12-1, assuming things go the way they're supposed to in the Big Ten. But yeah, Alabama pretty much clinched. Georgia, they also are nearly clinched. I think they need to win 2 out of 3 of their last games to solidify that spot. And I mean, if you look at it, Charlotte's an easy win. And so they're going to have to take one of Texas or Georgia Tech. Texas could be a tricky game. I'll cover that in my game predictions later, but I think this could be a pretty tricky game. And then Georgia Tech, who knows, because it's a rivalry game. That says it's on the road, but I'm pretty sure it's just played in Atlanta. So, I mean, I might not be correct on that, but I think Georgia should have essentially a home field advantage in that game. And I don't think they're going to lose that game, but, we'll see how Georgia Tech looks regardless. If they go 10-2, they're in. If they go 11-1, they will definitely host a playoff game in round 1. Could have a shot at a bye, but I think it's a bit of a long shot. And then I don't really think they would need some help to qualify for the SEC title game because they don't have the head-to-head with Alabama, so that could be a bit of a struggle. But regardless, Georgia's looking pretty good right now. Texas Tech, what a huge win for them against BYU. Absolutely dominated the Cougars. And if you look at their schedule, they should be easily going 11-1. UCF is not a threat. West Virginia is not a threat. If they go 11-1, they're in prime position. And I think if they go 11-2, they will still be in because I have a hard time believing the committee's going to punish them for losing, for playing in a conference championship game. And then I think if they go 12-1, they have a serious shot at a bye. You need to think maybe if Alabama loses badly to Texas A&M, they would finish 11-2. I think Texas Tech would be primed to slide right up in there to get to number 4 and get a first-round bye. But Texas Tech looking like by far the class of the Big 12. Good looks for them as we near the end of the season. Ole Miss, another team that's looking good. They're kind of held back a little bit because they do have the head-to-head loss with Georgia, so I don't think they're going to be able to, A, qualify for the SEC title game, and B, get to that hosting. I think they will, get a first-round bye. I think they'll be able to host a playoff game if they go 11-1, which, looking at their schedule, shouldn't be too hard. I think they'll beat Florida. At Mississippi State could be challenging just because it's a rivalry game. We'll see what happens. But I think they can go 10-2. They'll still be in. 11-1 they will host. Looking very good for the Rebels. Oregon, right now, they're looking good. That win at Iowa was absolutely huge for them. But the rest of their schedule could be a little tricky. We have the Minnesota game, should be a win for them. And then we got USC and then at Washington. So I have here that they have to win at least 2 out of those 3. Because I think a 10-2 Oregon would make it in, probably at the 10 or 11 spot. And then, again, if they go 11-1, they will certainly be hosting a playoff game. Could even potentially make the Big Ten title game and, work their way up even further. However, let's say they lose to USC, and then Michigan also wins out. Then you would have 11-1 Ohio State, or let's just say, 11-1 Ohio State, 10-2 USC, 10-2 Michigan, 12-0 Indiana, and then 10-2 Oregon. Oregon would be below USC, and I don't know if they're going to let 5 teams in, because what would Oregon's best win be? At Iowa, and then you got Michigan's best win at Ohio State. So I think Oregon might actually get left out in that scenario. Granted, a lot of things need to go wrong for that. However, I think the most important game for them is the USC game, because I think that will essentially lock up their playoff spot. Notre Dame. Notre Dame is an interesting one because they don't really have the quality wins. They have a huge chance at Pitt this week. And so for Notre Dame, really, it's simple. They just have to win out. If you lose the game, you're not making the playoff at 9-3. And then 10-2, the committee has shown that they're valuing Notre Dame. They're currently at 9, so if they go 10-2, they're not gonna drop out. And then I've said that they have potential to host at 10-2, but it really depends on what teams below them do. Like, I would take, who knows, maybe a 9-3 Texas would get ranked ahead of Notre Dame. I don't think that's ridiculous. A 10-2 Oklahoma would definitely get ahead of them. So there's some things that could go against them that could prevent them from hosting. But regardless, if they go 10-2, they're in. Texas is the interesting. They're kind of the talk of the playoff discussion right now, because would 9-3 be good enough is the question. I think yes. If you win either Georgia or Texas A&M, let's say they win this weekend at Georgia and they beat Arkansas, then lose to Texas A&M, 9-3. That's a pretty solid resume with that win at Georgia. Obviously 10-2 and they're in comfortably. But 9-3, is it good enough? I said that they may need help from some teams below that, from some other teams. For example, Vanderbilt would need to lose a game. Then Texas, they'd be both 9-3. Texas would get in over. I think if BYU loses another game, they would be out of the discussion, whereas BYU is kind of a wild card because they could always, right now, they're in a position to still win the Big 12 if they were to upset Texas Tech, which would get 2 Big 12 teams in, which would be bad for Texas. And then if Texas were to go 9-3, they would need Oklahoma to lose again, because then they would both be 9-3 and Texas holds the tiebreaker. So a little bit complicated for Texas, but I think it's manageable. I think if they go 9-3, they're going to give themselves a good shot. Then Oklahoma, I think their only path is 10-2, because at 9-3, they would be behind. Texas is really what's holding them back, because at 9-3, they would need Texas to go 8-4, and if you're below Texas, it's feeling like that's going to be a situation where they would get left out of the playoffs. And it's doable for them to do that. It starts this weekend at Alabama. This is their biggest game of the season by far. Then Missouri and LSU, I think they could win those games. So for Oklahoma, it's simple. You just got to win out and you're in. BYU is in a bit of a sticky situation because they kind of got exposed against Texas Tech. Obviously, if they go 12-1, run the table, win the Big 12, they're in, no questions. 11-2, if they were to go 11-1 and then lose the Big 12 title game, that would be interesting. Would the committee punish them for playing that extra game? I don't know. Maybe if it's a close game, they get in. Maybe if it's a blowout, then they would get eliminated. I'm fine with that. And then 10-2 or lower just simply isn't going to do it. It's not looking like, well, for one, BYU doesn't really have much on their schedule. And if you look at their remaining games, it's not great, although it is challenging. At Cincinnati would be a good win. So yeah, I really think BYU, their best shot is just to win out. Utah is in another tough situation too, because they need to win the Big 12 in my opinion, and it's kind of hard for them to move up based on where they're at in the standings right now, because they lost to both Texas Tech and BYU. That's really unfortunate for them. It's going to be hard for them to move up because they already have the 2 conference losses, so they need a little bit of chaos. They'd also need to run the table and then finish 11-2, and then they begin, obviously. But 10-2, 10-3, I don't think would cut it. So yeah, Utah's in a bit of a sticky situation because I think they're going to have a really hard time getting in as an at-large without many quality wins. Vanderbilt, I really think Vanderbilt, if they go 10-2, they'll probably be in, because that would give them a win at Kentucky. Win at Tennessee, a win versus Kentucky. And then they might need a little bit of help. They probably need Texas to lose again. They would need maybe Oklahoma. They probably need Oklahoma to lose again. They might need like help from BYU too, and then Vanderbilt should get in. Although I don't know about that Tennessee game. I don't think Vanderbilt's going to make the playoffs personally. Miami, this is tricky. They need to win out, and the question would then become, is 10-2 good enough for them without getting into the ACC title game? Because right now they have a very, very slim chance of actually making that ACC title game. So I don't know. I don't think 10-2 should be good enough. But, who knows? That Pitt game is a good win. They still have the Notre Dame win, which the committee likes to commend Notre Dame for losing close to Miami, but they don't really like to think that that's a good win for Miami, it seems like. I don't know. It's a little interesting for them, but I think in a 10-2 situation, Miami would get in over Notre Dame. So who knows? Maybe they would have a chance. I think their best bet is to win out and win these games convincingly, give themselves the best shot. Georgia Tech. I think the easiest path for them, obviously, this is for a lot of these ACC teams. You win the conference, you should be in. And for them, they have a tough schedule, especially that Georgia game looming. Let's say they lose the Georgia game, and then they win the ACC title game. Obviously, they'd be in. 12-1, they're obviously in. What if they beat Georgia and then lose in the ACC title game? I still think they'd be in. I don't think the committee would punish them for playing that extra game. And then 10-2 or anything less is just simply not going to be enough. They don't have enough on their schedule. USC, they also have a tricky remaining schedule. I think they just need to win out. If they win out, there's potential that they could be the ones in the Big Ten title game if Michigan beats Ohio State. I believe USC would get the nod there. And that, granted, a lot needs to go right for them. But I think if they win out, the committee's going to have a really hard time not keeping them in. Iowa's a good win. Michigan's a good win. You would have a win at Oregon. That's a good win. So I think USC, if they win out, they should be in. Maybe they need a little help. I don't know. Maybe a Notre Dame loss. A Notre Dame loss would be good for them because they did lose to Notre Dame. But yeah, I like USC's chances if they win out. And same with Michigan, because that Ohio State game is their Super Bowl. If they win that game, they finish 10-2. They have probably one of the best wins in the country. I think they would likely be in. However, I don't know. They might need a little help from USC. I think a USC loss is critical for them because they don't have the head-to-head. Same with Oklahoma, because those could potentially hold them back if the three of those teams were to go 10-2. But overall, I think if Michigan wins out, the rest should play itself out and they would get in. Then we got some ACC teams. Virginia, really their only path is to win the ACC. An ACC team is not going to get in at 10-2 this year. Besides maybe Miami, it's just not going to happen. The conference isn't strong enough. The committee's showing us they're not valuing them that much. So Virginia, I'd say, needs to win the ACC, and it's possible. They only have one conference loss. A Duke win would be huge because Duke is surprisingly in the conference race. That could be a potential nightmare scenario I'll talk about later. But yeah, Virginia, I think they just need to win the ACC. Likewise with Louisville, they need to win out and win the ACC. I mean, I suppose they could drop that Kentucky game and still win the ACC, and they'd probably still get in. But they're in a little bit of a trickier situation because they already have two conference losses, and the rest of their schedule isn't very favorable. I don't like Louisville's chances, but they're still alive. Pitt, look at their remaining schedule. Versus Notre Dame, at Georgia Tech, versus Miami. That's a tough schedule. And so I wrote that they must win the ACC with a question mark because, I mean, if they go 10-2, that's a pretty solid schedule. Let's say Georgia Tech goes on to, I don't know if this is mathematically possible, but let's say Georgia Tech loses that game and then goes on to win the ACC championship. Those are three solid wins. So they may have a case if they go 10-2 with this remaining schedule, but the clearest path for them, win the ACC. They beat Georgia Tech, they beat Miami, they will be in the ACC title game. Cincinnati, a Big 12 team, I think they would have to win the Big 12, and they're in a good position to do so. They win that BYU game. That's huge for them. It's not easy, though, and they still have to play at TCU, which TCU is not a terrible team. It could get tricky for them, but if they win the Big 12, they'll be in. Otherwise, I don't think they're going to have enough. Same with Houston. They have to win the Big 12. They're not even ranked right now. Or maybe they are. I can't remember if they're ranked. Oh, my goodness. Regardless, 10-2 is not getting them in. They only have 2 games left on the schedule. They would not move up into top 12. So they would have to win the Big 12. Same with ASU. This is a team that really isn't that alive right now. They would have to win out, and then they need some help to make the Big 12 title game. which looks unlikely for them, but I kept them here because they're still technically alive. SMU in the ACC. SMU I'm actually starting to like because they're at 5-1. The Louisville win would be big. The Cal win would be big. If they go 9-3 and then go 10-3, win the ACC, they'd be in, obviously. And it's interesting for them because SMU is a team that not a lot of people are talking about, but they only have one conference loss. And with some of the other ACC teams we're seeing that are going to play each other, they have a serious shot to make the ACC title game. So SMU is sitting relatively pretty. And Duke, this is the crazy nightmare scenario for the ACC. Look at Duke's remaining schedule. They got Virginia, North Carolina, Wake. The Virginia win would be huge. That would essentially knock Virginia out of the race. If you get a little bit of chaos, like say you get, Pitt and Georgia Tech play, and then if Duke runs the table, they would probably be, and then maybe you get an SMU loss, Duke would probably be in the ACC title game at 8-4. And then if they win that at 9-4, they would essentially be in the playoffs. However, the playoff format only guarantees the top 4 ranked conference champions. So what if a group of 5 team like South Florida is ranked higher than Duke when it's all said and done, and Duke gets left out? It's possible because the group of 5 conference champion can take one of those 4 spots for the highest ranked conference champions, and then that would open up another at-large bid. So it's an interesting scenario. I don't know. It could realistically happen, guys. I don't know. That'd be really interesting to see what the committee would do if that happens. But Duke is still alive. And I didn't make a slide for the group of 5 because it's still largely up for grabs. But you got Memphis. They lost to Tulane. That was a tough loss for them. Right now it's looking like USF, Navy, James Madison are the top 3. And the reason I say Navy is because they play USF this week. And so I think the winner of that game will be in a good position. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to JMU versus USF. And we'll see what the committee does there. But that's an interesting race that's heating up. But anyways, guys, those are all the teams that are still alive for the college football playoff. Let me know who you think has the best chance of making it, who you think could be a potential dark horse, what bubble team do you think will get in, left out. And I'll see you guys in the next video.